Good evening, London, and good afternoon, New York, and welcome to this NLA NYLON event, activating public spaces in New York and London. I'm Emily Gabb. I'm Head of Strategic Partnerships at NLA, and I'm delighted to see so many people are joining us online. We obviously are in an empty London centre this evening because of planned tube strikes that then didn't end up happening, but there we go. So for those of you that are unfamiliar with NLA, we are London's built environment community, a cross-sector membership organisation for everyone committed to shaping a better city. Our network of over 30,000 members spreads across all aspects of city governance, planning, design, development and management across public and private sector. So we run hundreds of events across the year. We have research reports, exhibitions, and business critical industry insights, all of which can be accessed by becoming a member of NLA if you are not one already. So today we're going to hear from New York and London on rethinking streetscapes to prioritize people, create dynamic and sustainable environments, and enhance the public realm. Following on from the NLA's Public London Activating the City report, this event brings together experts from New York and London to share insights on rethinking streetscapes by relocating space in favour of people. So focusing on globally famous streets across London and New York, these retail and tourist destinations are facing significant transport and mobility pressures, and we'll be exploring the transformations needed to create dynamic, sustainable environments and enhance the public realm, strengthening the global element of these streets. The discussion will emphasize the importance of partnerships and also look at long-term strategies. And this evening's event is part of our City Dialogues program, which brings together speakers and audiences to foster cross-city dialogue and learning. So the event this evening is in association with KPF, the AIA New York Global Dialogues Committee, and the Centre for Architecture in New York City. So a couple of housekeeping bits. There will be opportunities to ask questions of our speakers. So for those of you who are tuning in online in London, please do send your questions via the Q&A button on Zoom. And for those of you in New York City, Larissa will take questions from the floor at the end of the session. I'd now like to hand over to Rutger Huberts, who is Director at KPF in New York. Over to you.
Emily, hi there. I hope you can see me. Yes. My name is Rutger Huberts. I'm a co-chair of the Global Dialogues Committee. It's great to see you here in person in the room. Notwithstanding the tube strike in London, the elections here, I'm sure we all have a lot of things on our heads, but I'm very appreciative of your presence here. On behalf of the Global Dialogues Committee, I'd like to welcome you. We have our mission to really foster dialogue between local practitioners on the built environment and engage in conversation with events or happenings abroad. So we're very happy to collaborate with New London Architecture today. I'll first start with a brief introduction of the speakers in the New York side. Emily, if you could afterwards introduce the speakers on the London side as well, that would be very helpful. And so we'll start first with an introduction of the topic today by Larissa Ortiz. Let me just grab my notes here. She's the Managing Director of Public Nonprofit Solutions at StreetSense. Larissa leads the economic development consulting engagement for StreetSense's municipal and nonprofit clients, including various business improvement districts. We'll also be joined by Isabel Castilla, who's an associate partner at Field Operations. Isabel recently led the design team for the High Line Moynihan Connector, design of the public realm for 175 Park Avenue in Manhattan, and recently has been very engaged in the design efforts for the redesign of Fifth Avenue in New York. After that, we'll have a panel discussion during which we'll be joined by Alexis Taylor, who is the Vice President of Climate Resilience at the New York City Economic Development Corporation. She's responsible for leading a portfolio of resilience and waterfront projects, which include neighborhood scale projects like the Financial District, Seaport climate resilience master plan, the resilient waterfront greenway planning, and public realm redesigns. And she is the project director for the Fifth Avenue project here in New York. And lastly, our fourth speaker in New York will be Madeline Wills, who is the interim president of the Fifth Avenue Association. Madeline has worked on major public realms initiatives in the city for over 20 years, among which notably the Hudson River Park. And she also has been very closely involved in representing all the stakeholders for the redesign of Fifth Avenue. And before we move on to that, I'd like to thank the Center for Architecture for hosting us, the New London Architecture Group for also co-organizing this event, the team at KPF for supporting us. And let's welcome to the stage, or let's first do the introduction of the speakers in London. Emily?
So this evening we have joining us on the London side, Canon Ivers, who is a director at LDA Design. We have Dan Johnson, who is interim director of Place and Environment at the Knightsbridge Partnership and founder of Attis and Placemaking London. And then joining us for the panel discussion, also from London, we have Leif Lomo, who is director at KPF.
For today.
Good afternoon. Thank you to our sponsors, the American Institute of Architects, New York Global Dialogues Committee, and New London Architecture. I'm really thrilled to come together as friends from across the pond to discuss the future of our high streets and commercial corridors. But I really don't think we can move forward without acknowledging the most important election of our lifetime, whose results we know today. Regardless of what side of the aisle you are on, this election will have far-reaching consequences. In 2023, New York City welcomed 11.6 million international visitors, a 23% increase from the previous year. What happens to immigration and the immigration policies we set will impact our commercial districts, will impact our retail corridors. As a woman, as a Puerto Rican woman, it's actually quite emotional time. As we think about the impact on our streets, the work must go on. Business owners have to succeed, have to be in an environment where their businesses function. We will see how the policies promised from our next president will impact the future of our streets. So today we're going to discuss insights from a diverse set of speakers. We're going to talk about the challenges of reinventing these retail streets and how we can make sure they accommodate a really wide variety of users, maintain foot traffic, and meet retailers' logistical needs. We're going to talk about how we manage the competing priorities of constituents, because not everybody can get what they want. There's a competition for space, competition for the curb, and I think that's a really important discussion we have to have here. And then we're going to talk about the complexities of achieving consensus in an environment where there are many different voices. So I'm really excited to have this conversation, and let's dive in. And I'm going to hand it to Canon Ivers, who's the director of LDA Design.
Good afternoon, New York. Just getting our slides loaded up here in London. As an introduction, I am an American-born and educated in the States, and I've lived in London now for 2 decades. So I'll be able to slide easily between feet and inches to meters. I'll be able to talk about footpaths and sidewalks, litter bins and trash cans. So do definitely raise those questions at the end. So I'm going to speak for around 7 minutes. That's one as a provocation to lubricate the conversations we're going to have, but also to frame what I think is a global movement now of rebalancing cities and making space for both pedestrians and the more than human, and thinking about biodiversity, ecologically rich habitats, and those that we share the planet with in the wide web of life. There we go. So the title of my talk is Retrofit City, Social Ecologies in the Symbiocene. And as I said previously, this is a frame in which to explore what we're seeing in places like London, New York, Paris, Brussels, and other major competitive cities around the world. This seminal quote by Fred Kent: if you plan cities for cars and traffic, you get cars and traffic. If you plan for people and places, you get people and places. That has resulted in what many of us will be familiar with, are images and scenes like, if I can advance the slide, this, images like this, scenes like this, great listed and protected historic architecture with car parks in front of them, side streets that seem to not really give any space to pedestrians, and 4 lanes of traffic passing through one of London's greatest shopping areas with iconic global architecture. This is Brompton Road. Many of you may not recognize the name Brompton Road, but you most certainly will recognize the department store Harrods. They're seen in the foreground. Now, traffic really hasn't dominated cities always. This is something that's relatively new. This is that same vista in 1916. And if you look carefully at the sidewalk, the footpath, the area of public realm on the left, and on the right, and the street in the center, I'm going to show you what that scene looks like today. And what you'll notice is that in this image, there is mobility, there is cycling, there's motor cars, there's pedestrians, there's different ways of moving about the city. But there is no street clutter, there are no retaining walls, there are no balustrades or handrails. This is that same vista now, and you can see what's happened as cars have gotten larger, speeds have increased, on-street parking has proliferated. You end up with all of that public realm has been swept away to create retaining walls, street clutter, balustrades, etc. We're now in a moment where we're starting to reclaim that. We're able to look and say, when these streets were laid out, were they carefully looked at to find out what is the absolute minimum amount of area that they need for cars and traffic to function? And therefore, can we give back more of that space to pedestrians, to nature, to tree planting, all of these key ingredients that we need to combat the major issues that we know we are facing with the climate crisis. So this is a project that Dan Johnson will go into in more detail. But I think that slide, that sequence of slides really illustrates the progression of how we've gone from what cities were like before the proliferation of the automobile, the dominance of the automobile, and where we are now. That slide got me thinking, and I came across this quote. As ecosystems develop, they tend towards greater diversity, complexity, and interconnectedness. So if you think back to that image of changing Brompton Road and the Knightsbridge Quarter to include more space for people, to include more biodiversity, to include more areas for nature, it starts to suggest perhaps that we're not that far from seeing streets as an ecosystem, a place of exchange, of encounter, of interdependence and interconnectedness. The Strand in central London, outside of Somerset House, near King's College, outside of Coulthard Gallery, 2 institutions, it is a complex urban environment with a whole host of different stakeholders. There was historically 4 lanes of traffic that looks like this image here. It was a one-way gyratory that was really dominated by a single use, and that was the movement of people in cars, hermetically sealed with controlled environments. In 2021, the traffic was redirected to create a new space, a new platform for cultural exchange, for creativity to be visible in the public space, and really to create a brand new setting for incredible architecture, listed architecture, the grade 1 listed St. Mary Le Strand in the foreground, and for institutions like Somerset House, the Coulthard Gallery, King's College, to really be able to use this as a new kind of ecosystem in which they could cross-pollinate and come together and share ideas. So an extension, an obvious extension then to move beyond ecologies is this idea of social ecologies. And Chris Reed, writing in the book Staging Urban Landscapes, describes social ecologies are the interaction of and interrelationships between various individuals and each other, and between them and their environments. So if you take that idea of an ecosystem a step further to think about how can we create social ecologies, creating spaces where you have different scales, places that feel intimate on one day, but at the same moment can be used for the exchange of knowledge, events, installations, which you've seen at London Design Festival. This is the first and second iterations of the rise of the pavilion culture, and this idea of introducing infrastructure and something that causes conversations. As William H. White, many of you in New York will be familiar with him, this idea of triangulation where you introduce something that encourages people to have a conversation where they wouldn't have previously. And the last bit of, let's say, the intellectual structure for the conversation today is around this idea of the symbiocene. So the final quote from Glenn Albrecht is, the scientific meaning of the word symbiosis implies living together for mutual benefit. And I wish to use this profoundly important concept as the basis for what I hope will be the next period of Earth history. As a core aspect of ecological thinking, symbiosis affirms the interconnectedness of life and all living things. Bringing nature into cities is going to be incredibly important, and is going to continue to increase as far as the way in which we inhabit public space. Moments where you can create intimate, immersive landscapes. And also to note in London that alongside these larger projects to really transform urban spaces are smaller spaces. This is Alfred Place off of Tottenham Court Road, which was converted to create a brand new linear park. Princess Circus, some of those images you've seen before of transforming a fairly nondescript area with beautiful architecture to reconnect public realm and buildings together. Thinking about the nighttime economy. This image of King's College at London Bridge, again, historic architecture. And I love this slide just because I managed to get the transition beautiful of removing those cars to create, again, that platform where anything can happen with the students. And then finally at UCL, another London campus, this was a place for bringing deliveries and things in and then transforming that into a place where you can test ideas. So nothing has changed as far as the surface, but bringing in furniture, allowing interaction, allowing conversation to take place is a fantastic way for testing some of those long-term ideas in a relatively quick and affordable way. And to close with a final quote to hopefully prompt some conversation, Richard Weller, the incredible theorist and landscape architect at University of Penn, as they do with culture, cities will soon compete to be the most biodiverse. Thank you very much.
I will be discussing the future of Fifth, an initiative to transform Fifth Avenue from Bryant Park to Central Park. And before we begin, I wanted to provide a little project background on what really instigated this study. Back in 2020, Mayor Adams, the mayor of New York City, and Governor Hochul, the governor of New York State, launched a new New York panel to examine the future of New York City and the region's economy. The panel released the Making of New York Work for Everyone action plan to guide the city's path to equitable economic recovery, including proposals to create a world-class network of public spaces in Midtown Manhattan that will increase the area's value as a destination that spurs economic growth. The proposal recommended making Fifth Avenue from Bryant Park to Central Park into a vibrant corridor for pedestrians by expanding sidewalks, improving lighting, and adding more seating. And as a result of that, to realize the actions plan, the city established the Future of Fifth public-private partnership, which includes a partnership between New York City's City Hall, various city agencies, and the 4 bids that cover the area. The reason why Fifth Avenue was selected and why it's so important is because Fifth Avenue is an economic engine for New York City. As of 2020, the Fifth Avenue area has recovered 80% of pre-COVID retail and accommodation sales, with $3.9 billion in taxable sales. What that means for the city of New York is that approximately $175.5 million in taxes are generated from Fifth Avenue, contributing in turn to improvements to the larger New York City area. Fifth Avenue generates over 300,000 direct and indirect jobs, contributing to $4.1 billion in total wages and $111.5 billion in economic output. So beyond being a retail touristic destination, Fifth Avenue, again, is an important economic engine for the city of New York. So what the study entails is to revisit Fifth Avenue, connecting it from Bryant Park on its southern end at 40th Street to Central Park on its northern end at 60th Street. And as we look at this specific study area, it's characterized by being a premier global destination. It holds many office buildings. It holds a lot of flagship retail, luxury retail, and a number of recognizable cultural attractions, including St. Patrick's Cathedral, Rockefeller Center, and Grand Army Plaza. However, this is what Fifth Avenue generally looks like today. It's a very basic sidewalk. It lacks identity, it lacks a sense of place, and is highly dominated by traffic. And one of the key things that we see on this image is the presence of the roadway, of those buses and taxis dominate the pedestrian experience of its sidewalks. It's really today a circulation corridor, much more than that. Looking at its roadway today, the street, Fifth Avenue, is 100 feet in width. Its existing roadway is 54 feet in width, and it includes 3 travel lanes and 2 bus lanes. Sidewalks on either side are 23 feet each. However, important to note on this image that out of those 23 feet, many areas are encumbered by streetscape elements such as bus shelters, lampposts, trash cans, which in turn reduce the actual occupiable and circulation space to 15 feet only. When we began this project, one of our main tasks was to understand how is Fifth Avenue used today and what are the different modes of transportation that inhabit the street and how can we reallocate space for pedestrians. And what we found out, this is a dot matrix that showcases all of the different users during only 1 hour on a regular day on Fifth Avenue. What we found out is that pedestrians are nearly 70% of the people that occupy the street, between pedestrians, bus riders, people on bicycles, taxis, private cars. Yet they only occupy 30% of the space of Fifth Avenue. Obviously, noting for us that there needs to be a rebalancing of the street, a rebalancing of modes of transportation to prioritize pedestrians. Not only are these sidewalks not wide enough, Fifth Avenue sees pedestrian volumes that are in par with some of the busiest places around the world. And that metric that I just mentioned, over 5,000 pedestrians an hour, just happens on the day-to-day. During the holidays, when Fifth Avenue becomes a key destination, we see volumes of up to 12,000 people per hour on a regular weekday, and on the weekends, up to 23,000 people an hour, which barely fit on the sidewalks, as we see on the image on the top. In addition to that, Fifth Avenue is lacking any places for rest, public furniture, which in turn leads people to do what we see on the images on the bottom, sit on the ground, sit on windowsills, further cluttering the sidewalk and preventing a comfortable place to move through. So as part of this project, understanding all of these observations, we set up a series of key goals. The first is to transform Fifth Avenue with a design that truly prioritizes pedestrians and solidifies the avenue's status as a premier global destination for offices, retail, and culture that is appealing to both New Yorkers and visitors alike. To do so, we need to reallocate space to widen sidewalks and shorten crosswalks. I wish we could push the buildings aside, but we can't. So we do need to understand how the avenue operates today and how can we balance those different modes to be able to prioritize pedestrians, with the end goal that enhancing Fifth Avenue with wider, more inviting sidewalks and crosswalks will encourage people to linger longer, both New Yorkers and visitors alike, and therefore continue improving our economy and that economic engine that Fifth Avenue presents for New York City. We looked as part of our studies across the world to how major cities are rethinking their streets by widening sidewalks and reducing the roadway. Obviously, Champs-Élysées in France becomes the #1 example. In 2020, they began a renovation that reduced the roadway by 50%, enlarging sidewalks by 50 feet. Not only was it successful, we understand from the city of Paris, they continue to explore ways to further reduce the roadway and further enlarge sidewalks, again, prioritizing pedestrians. And speaking to our friends across the pond in London, we also looked at Bond Street. Bond Street had a renovation that again reduced in 2018 the roadway and expanded the sidewalks. And what that resulted into is that it elevated Bond Street's status to become the second highest leasing per square foot location in Europe, closely following Via Napolitana in Milan, which holds the top spot. So all of these studies allow us to understand again how cities are moving forward, prioritizing pedestrians, reducing the roadway, and enhancing their public spaces. So as we come back to New York City, obviously we had to take a better understanding of how traffic and transit worked on Fifth Avenue to be able to balance these different modes of transportation. Fifth Avenue, to add to our complexity, holds the largest amount of buses of all avenues in New York City. As you see the graph on the top in red, that is Fifth Avenue in comparison to everything else. So it's a key transportation corridor.
At the same time, we see that buses in Fifth Avenue are not in full occupancy. In fact, they're only at 10% occupancy. So while we do need to prioritize public transportation and ensure buses continue operating to the same level as we see today, we're working with the Metropolitan Transportation Authority to see ways in which we can optimize bus usage based on the observations we had. When it comes to vehicles, of the three travel lanes in Fifth Avenue today, only 2 are consistently being used for traveling vehicles. The third lane is mostly stop-and-go traffic from people either delivering goods or picking and dropping off passengers, which is technically not allowed on Fifth Avenue. And 20% of the cars that are passing through Fifth Avenue are only passing through. They're really not going to a specific destination. So again, that gives us cues that there's ways in which we can reduce the amount of travel lanes while still keeping bus operations to be able to enlarge sidewalks. So looking back at what Fifth Avenue looks like today, this is the proposal we're exploring at the moment, where we are reducing the roadway to 33 feet, including 1 central bus lane as it exists today, 1 curb lane to allow buses to pull over and pick up and drop off passengers, and 1 vehicular travel lane. This in turn allows us to enlarge sidewalks by 10.5 feet each, totaling a 46% increase in space, which can not only accommodate the amount of pedestrians we see today on the day-to-day, but also accommodate other streetscape improvements that make Fifth Avenue a place as opposed to a sidewalk, including street trees, lighting, and public furnishing. In addition to that, by reducing the roadway and enlarging sidewalks, we're able to reduce crosswalk lengths. In the east-west direction, we're reducing them by 21 feet. And on the northwest direction, we're reducing them by 11 feet, in addition to lifting them to be at the same level of the sidewalk in an effort, again, to prioritize pedestrians, ensuring that Fifth Avenue is #1 directed to pedestrian comfort, pedestrian safety, as opposed to vehicles. These are some images, again, of what Fifth Avenue looks like today, that basic sidewalk, that non-place, and what these improvements seek to achieve: a wide pedestrian corridor against storefronts for shoppers to be able to come in and out, a furnishing zone that includes new street trees, plantings, urban seating, and again, creates a much more pleasant environment for visitors and New Yorkers. Looking back at the center of that extremely wide roadway dominated by traffic, how these improvements reduce the roadway while still prioritizing public transportation and create a much greener corridor connecting park to park. So to give you some metrics on what the improvements are, we're looking at a 46% increase in sidewalks. By doing so, we're looking to introduce 231 new trees, again, connecting Bryant Park to Central Park, also creating an urban ecological corridor and looking at a much more sustainable street. We're able to introduce 2,000 square feet of new planters, reduce north-south sidewalks by 33%, and reduce east-west crossings by 38%, again, favoring pedestrians. Thank you.
Thanks, Isabel. Great to learn more about the project. So I'd now like to introduce Dan Johnson, Interim Director of Place and Environment at the Knightsbridge Partnership and founder of Attis and Placemaking London. Over to you, Dan.
Thank you, Emily. It's great to be here this evening. So I'm going to run through a few slides on the work that we've been carrying out in Knightsbridge, looking at the place and public realm and how we can really make it a much better place into the future for everyone that works, lives and visits the area. So we've got a slide here that shows how Knightsbridge is. So in terms of the London plan, Knightsbridge sits to the west of central London. And in the London plan, it's one of 2 international centres, the other being the Oxford Street district. I think what's important here is that we are showing that Knightsbridge is both a route and a place. And over the last 20, 30 years, I think that route function has really dominated. So it's one of the key roads into central London from Heathrow, onto the West End and other places. And it's really, in many ways, lost its way as a destination. As Canon was saying earlier, it's known as a home of luxury. but today it doesn't necessarily feel like that. And one of the great advantages of having a business improvement district is that it brings together the partners. So in this area of London, we have 3 highway authorities, and without the business improvement district, the Knightsbridge Partnership, it wouldn't have been possible to bring together all those partners to develop a vision and a plan for the area. So when we started to look at the area, it was very important to continue to maintain its route function, so traffic flows through the area. But what kind of space can we reallocate to pedestrians and other sustainable uses in the area? So the red area broadly shows the core study area. And then the blue line around the wider area was really, we wanted to understand if we were to reallocate road space, we wanted to make sure that the traffic still stays on Brompton Road and Knightsbridge, it's not diverted onto local residential roads. And it's a very important point for us because whilst it's a commercial area, it's very residential as well. So as I say, Knightsbridge is known as the home of luxury. It's one of London's 2 international centres. But today, the lived experience is not that. These photographs really show what Knightsbridge is like today. It's been very much neglected. The public realm is in poor condition. It's difficult to cross the roads. Parts of the footways are elevated, so they're not accessible. It's cluttered. It doesn't particularly feel safe at night. The footways are crowded at peak times. So, but we have opportunities. So traffic has fallen. Traffic levels have fallen in London over the last 20 years. And Knightsbridge itself, the carriageway and the widths vary along its length. So this whole scheme that we're working on is almost a mile long. And the widths vary along that length. And the number of lanes vary, and the widths of those lanes vary as well. So we find that there's areas where the traffic flows well, but there's bottlenecks as well. So in terms of designing this scheme, we work with really good transport engineers, NRP, to really understand what kind of road space we can reallocate and how we can do that to make sure it works as a route and also a place. The other thing that was really important for us was to spend a lot of time working with stakeholders to really engage the local communities and get the different communities working together. And we learned an awful lot in that process, and we spent a year doing that. And one of the things we really learned is there's a burning platform. So only about a quarter of people think in recent times Knightsbridge has improved, so 3/4 think it's staying the same or getting worse. So that engagement approach, which is a co-design approach, we engage an awful lot of stakeholders. We take our time doing that, and a huge amount of feedback, really useful feedback. And what really came out of that was the pedestrian experience is poor. The footways are narrow, the air quality is poor, there are not safe places to cross the road. Secondly, people wanted to see more greening, so they wanted it to feel and look like Hyde Park in this image, which it doesn't at the moment. There's also a sense that the design of the area, the design of the public realm doesn't match the beauty of the architecture. And third, as a place, it doesn't feel safe at the moment. We also carried out international comparison of retail centres, luxury centres, and used a number of criteria to assess those and identify where Knightsbridge is failing at the moment, where it's underperforming, and to understand where those destinations are performing well so we can borrow from other destinations as well. And then from that, we identified a number of objectives, really to ensure that the economy is thriving, it's a better place that people can visit, biodiversity is supported, it's an easier place to walk around, and it feels spectacular from the point that one arrives in the area rather than your final destination in Knightsbridge. So, as I say, it is a place strategy. So a key to that is a flagship public realm scheme on Brompton Road and Knightsbridge, and I'll show some images of that in a moment. Also alongside that, a family of public realm projects on the side streets in the area, which I think there's about 13 or 14 of those. And then we really wanted to, it's not only about the public realm, but making sure it's used in a way that really enhances the offer in the area. So doing things like inside-out activations, developing the nighttime economy, and then in terms of place management, making sure it's a safer place, that the design of the scheme works well from day one and works well in 5 years and in 10 years' time. So thinking about that from the outset, And then finally, the funding strategy is really critical as well. So on this image here, there's the overall plan. There's three of these, but I'll just show one of these, which is really showing, I don't know if everyone can see, there's a red dotted line, so that really shows the existing footway line, and it shows the gain, a huge amount of additional planting in the area, additional crossings. The existing crossings are enhanced, so they become straight ahead crossings rather than staggered crossings. And all the side roads become courtesy crossings or continuous crossings where they are at the level of the footway to give that sense of pedestrian priority. So what everybody wants to see, this is what it's like today. And this is what it can be like in the short future. So lots of widened footways, more greening. This is an additional crossing that doesn't exist at the moment. And the only green space in the area, really enhancing this. Widening the footways, giving a sense of pedestrian priority across the road, providing more places to sit as well, which there are only 2 in the area at the moment. And this is Brompton Road looking towards Harrods. And again, that sense of really enhancing the area with a lot more greening, making the raised footway more accessible, more places to cross the road. And in terms of the side streets, after the 13 or 14 projects, Montpellier Road is one of these, where we really want to celebrate the florists there, with more planting in the area, widen the footways. You can see one of those continuous crossings there. So this view is taken from Brompton Road, looking north, creating a space where people can dwell in this area. At Yeoman's Road, at the moment, it's a traffic road, one of the side streets, so giving the opportunity there. It doesn't carry much traffic. There's other ways into the network of streets from this area. So this is a street that could be pedestrianised, more tree planting, more planting, and creating a space where people can dwell and really enjoy the area. So what does it deliver? 2,000 square metres of new planting, 170 new trees. I can see that Fifth Avenue are going to put in more, so I can see a bit of competition already going on. 5,000 square metres of new footways, 13 improved crossings, and 2 new crossings across the area. I'm really thinking about the curbside uses, so they're better designed so they work for the area and its visitors, the nature of visitors that we have in the area, an integrated crime reduction strategy, and thinking about how we prevent a proactive planned maintenance programme from the outset. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for that, Dan. Just before I pass over to Larissa in New York, I just want to remind everybody in London that we are obviously taking questions on the Q&A function on Zoom. So please do send us those over to us. So all of the speakers are going to come together now for the panel discussion, which is going to be led on the New York side, but our speakers from London are going to be involved in that as well. And then we'll alternate taking questions from the New York side and from London. So over to you, Larissa.
Hi, thank you. Can you guys hear me? So these are really impressive aspirations for both Brompton Road and Fifth Avenue. You're clearly trying to achieve economic functionality, address issues of sustainability, wonderful plantings and tree coverage, which I think is really important, and also pedestrian safety. So, I want to start out by asking, both sides of this, what are some of the thorniest issues you've had to navigate throughout this process? And especially, where have you faced pushback for some of these goals that we are trying to achieve here? And we'll start with you, Madeline.
Sure, I'll start. The original thorny issue, I think, came out of really the idea of why invest in a street in a wealthy area? Why invest in Midtown? There's a lot of great reasons to invest in Midtown. Before COVID in 2019, Fifth Avenue accounted for 5% of the city's jobs and 5% of its revenue. Now it's down to a little less than 4%. But that's very significant when you're looking at current 313,000 direct and indirect jobs. And at the time, it was 67,000 accommodation and retail jobs, which are jobs that people don't need a college education to have. So there's a lot of good reasons. It employs the city and the region, not just locally. And so that was, I think, the first issue to get across. And then, of course, there are so many citywide issues. You have organizations that want bike lanes. You have organizations that want more public transportation and more bus lanes. And there's very little advocacy for pedestrians, whereas New York City, as London is, has always been an enormously focused, pedestrian-focused cities, both of them, and yet we don't have advocacy for pedestrians. So there's a lot of conflicts. Now, in luxury retail, there's a belief that you need cars, and lots of them. So there's a lot of, there's a lot of compromise that has gone into these discussions with stakeholders for citywide efforts. But, if you're going to get anything done, you have to find the compromise, and you have to follow the data to figure out what those compromises should be. And that's what we did.
Our friends in London?
Okay, so in terms of Knightsbridge, the themes are very, very similar. Questions why invest in a luxury area, but of course, it's been articulated, luxury creates lots and lots of jobs, which is important for the wider London economy. I think importantly, we want to make any place work really well for the people that live in the area and the people that work in the area. And at the moment, for example, the Knightsbridge corridor has poor levels of air quality. So through these designs, we can really improve the air quality. And everywhere needs to adapt in terms of climate change. And that's one of the benefits of this scheme, that we're making Knightsbridge more resilient. But going back to the jobs point, the interim analysis that's been carried out on our behalf by economists shows that this investment in the Knightsbridge scheme could create in the region of 700 new jobs locally. So it's really good for the economy, lots of benefits for everybody by investing in places like this.
In both cases, I'm struck with the importance of data, making a data-driven case. I think both of you really leaned in on that. How critical, I guess, for you, Alexis, is that to convincing stakeholders and leadership that this incredible investment is necessary?
Yeah, so we collected a lot of data as part of our earlier analyses, both the numerical, as in pedestrian counts, traffic counts, but also went out with surveys, intercept surveys of people who are walking along Fifth Avenue, and online surveys. Overwhelmingly, even when we asked open-ended questions like, how would you describe the experience today of Fifth Avenue? The words that came up were chaotic, congested, unpleasant. And so I think, honestly, what the data first pointed to is that Fifth Avenue today wasn't working very well for anyone or any mode. And so the one thing that everyone agreed on is that we had to do something in order to improve it and improve the experience. I think what ended up resulting is that, we saw a space that has a lot of competition from different modes, high volume across all modes. But as Isabel's presentation demonstrated, by far pedestrians were the highest volume, and yet given the least amount of space. And so that really became our North Star. We were seeing volumes of pedestrians on Fifth Avenue that are the highest anywhere in the city, but also highest internationally. And that then became really the driving element of how do we make this a more comfortable space for pedestrians.
In both cases, you've got luxury retailers and therefore customers who have certain expectations of best-in-class environments. And I was struck by some of the examples that were given of other best-in-class environments. So could our designers on both sides, maybe starting with London, speak to what they believe are some of the key characteristics? And maybe we should call them flagship environments. I think that's the term you used. But what's really critical to get right when we're designing these environments? And where do you look for your inspiration? Maybe we start with London.
I think both luxury and quality public realm are synonymous. It is a luxury district based on the types of places that people are coming to visit and shop in. But in essence, I would argue that we want all public space to have a degree of sophistication, elegance, simplicity, something that feels like the pedestrian has been considered before other forces that are operating in the city. Increasingly, as we know, more green space, more places to be in the public realm, places to dwell, places to interact, places to people watch. All of those things are critically important. Whether you're in whatever part of the city you're in, it just so happens when you're in places like Knightsbridge and Fifth Avenue, that there's some incredible storefronts that give you an added benefit of seeing something beautiful and compelling and drawing a greater audience of people and different demographics into the area. I want to just add one thing around data and the thorny issue that you picked up on as well, which is around modeling and simulation. And we're speaking on behalf of our colleagues at NRP whose experience and understanding that the traffic network is one interconnected system. And that if you make change, I'm sure you're feeling this in New York as well, that if you make changes in one area, it does have an impact elsewhere. So making sure that there's an element of really understanding both through experience and simulation that you get these things right, that if you do make a change, it doesn't change the entire network.
I think the case of Fifth Avenue is quite unique because as we've learned from a lot of our stakeholders, Fifth Avenue feels like two avenues. There's the southern part of Fifth Avenue, which is mostly characterized by flagship stores, Nike, Puma, and these are places where we see shoppers actually walking up and down the avenue. These are the shoppers that told us it feels chaotic, it's lacking of sense of place, it feels like a mess. And then we have our other Fifth Avenue, the northern part of Fifth Avenue, which is mostly characterized by luxury shopping. In those cases, those stakeholders on Fifth Avenue specifically get dropped off in front of the store, go into the store, go back into their car and leave. Why? Because there isn't a pedestrian realm that's inviting for you to walk up and down the street. But when we look at examples elsewhere, when we speak to stakeholders, a lot of examples were brought up. Paseo de Gracia in Barcelona is a street that has been there for hundreds of years with beautiful boulevards of trees, similar mix of luxury and flagship retail, where people actually do inhabit the streets. They do sit down. They do enjoy the public realm. We then look at the US at newer shopping districts like the Miami Design District. It's not only about the sidewalks and the luxury retail, but it's about all of the courtyards that include rotating art exhibits, programming, areas that bring people to the place, that create an environment where it's about an experience beyond just shopping, but it's about dining, it's about strolling, it's about people watching, as it was mentioned. So it became very obvious to us that beyond improving Fifth Avenue as a circulation corridor, we actually had to make it into a place. And to make it into a place, we need to expand sidewalks to the point that they can accommodate other elements such as artwork, public seating, greenery, that in turn creates a much more sustainable street that looks towards the future and the development of our cities in the future and how they contribute to the larger sustainability of Manhattan. So, those were the critical moments for us to find that balance between the practical, how do we make the street work better, and how do we actually make it pedestrian, memorable, and a place.
Go ahead.
One other thing, when we started looking at this project before it became a citywide project, the inspiration for this was really a lot of the flagship stores on Fifth Avenue, what they were doing inside their doors. So they were moving from just being a selling experience to being a cultural experience. And they were offering art, food, something to do as a destination, a place to spend time, coffee bars. anything that would keep you in the store, because their feeling is they need to have people who want to spend time there in order for them to shop and take advantage of what there is to offer. And the stores on Fifth Avenue feel, when they say flagship, these are stores that carry some of the only items you can find around the world. And in order to stay a flagship, you have to get feet in the door. Feet in the door is something that every shop, every retailer, luxury or not, will tell you. They need qualified buyers, but before you get those, you need to get feet in the door, which means that as we were finding that people were spending less and less time on Fifth Avenue because they were not having a good experience. So they weren't walking the whole way. They weren't sightseeing. They were sightseeing in short spurts. And that's part of what we need to change, the experience of Fifth Avenue.
I'm curious, does anything that Madeline said resonate with our friends in London in terms of what you're seeing happening inside stores and some of the challenges of getting folks to stroll?
What we always start with is the history of the place. So one of the examples you said was the Strand. St. Mary's Le Strand was actually a riverfront area there. And of course, the great mansions and things of this nature in Knightsbridge. I think always bringing back a little bit of what that place is known for is a key point, I think, for wanting to make retail low destination seem more viable. Obviously, you have to make it work, but I don't think just adding paving is enough. And it seems to me that Fifth Avenue has a long heritage that sort of rests in all of our minds in a very similar way, whether it's Breakfast or Tiffany's, that's probably a little bit trite, but there's plenty of other examples of that place. So, I mean, for KPF, when we do our master plans, we did the Covent Garden master plan and also the King's College master plan, that's where we always start, is how do you perceive the place and how do we make it stronger culturally? So I agree with that sentiment completely.
I get pivoting a little bit to what was mentioned earlier in terms of the challenges of a street as circulation and a street and its sidewalks as destination. How do you balance that tension? Are there winners and losers in that game? Do you try to thread the needle? I guess every street is a little different, but how would you speak to that challenge?
One of the things that we try to do with Fifth Avenue is to recognize that across these 20 blocks, there's different uses, there's different destinations, and they merit a slightly different approach to the public space. So we set out the goals for the project, which is what I presented, the primary goals that will tie the corridor together in terms of circulation, street trees, furnishings. But we also look closely at the blocks that we would call were slightly different, had a different quality. The blocks in front of the New York Public Library, in front of Rockefeller Center and St. Patrick's Cathedral, where actually it's less about retail and it's a lot more about cultural destinations, a lot more about tourism. And we designed those slightly different. We designed them to be a lot more open, have a lot less street furniture to accommodate different flows of people that actually do congregate in those spaces and do today have public gatherings. So acknowledging, again, that we do have blocks that are retail-based, they're circulation areas. We do want them to be pleasant. We do want to have moments of pause, but they're not a park. They're still a street, versus these other moments where we do see, again, because of these cultural attractions and events that already take place there, that do merit a much more open public realm that can continue accommodating those spaces. And in that sense, create a cadence of spaces as you move through the street, where you have moments of connectivity versus moments of pause and different types of uses.
Ken, I think maybe you mentioned earlier, the circulation, the importance of circulation and acknowledging it. Can you speak to that challenge that you face on Knightsbridge in terms of making that decision of who gets the street?
Yeah, it's a great point as far as how do you reappropriate space and how do you create a sense of place that's not just purely about movement, getting from A to B, and therefore missing out on the extraordinary opportunities that are in the area. I think one of the key things certainly we've learned from the work on Knightsbridge is that if you uncover what exists there and really uncover what exists there, that often through a couple of very surgical key moves, you can connect those key features. So Hyde Park is very close to Knightsbridge, but for a lot of people, they don't know that it's there, that it's that close, because you can't get across the traffic to get to it in those key locations that you would want to. So the first thing I would say is really understand the key cultural opportunities, the key destinations that people are coming to anyway. And then when you get to that granular scale of thinking, okay, how do we make the sidewalks, the footpaths, something greater than what they are currently as a destination from A to B or a way of moving? That challenge of how much space, and it really comes back to the car and the carriageway and the what do you call it in America? I guess where the cars drive, that is the area that I think has the most flex, because we need to start taking back the inefficiencies of the road and give it back to either pedestrians, cyclists, nature, ecology, those sorts of things. And from our studies, and certainly this is where NRP has been critical, is there's inefficiencies in the road network and the spatial arrangement. So there's opportunities not to impact the flow of traffic, but at the same moment, widen those footways, increase the amount of tree planting, more seeding, everything that we're both trying to do happens. And it's hopefully through the detailed modeling, it will show it's really going to be a reality.
To that point, I was struck, Isabel, by the data point you shared that, the buses are at 10% capacity, right? And I think that the express buses, okay, that's important clarification. The express buses are at 10% capacity. Do we want to move to any questions that are coming online? I know that someone in London is handling.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So do we want to start from questions on this side? If you guys have got any in New York, we can do sort of a swap over. So if I hit one from here. So first one that we had come in, this is probably more of a London question, but obviously please do chip in on Fifth Avenue as well. Were any bike lanes or cycling infrastructure considered in these projects?
The answer is yes. It's very important. So when we're designing any of these schemes, we certainly think about all sustainable road users and their needs in the local area, but part of a wider network. And I think one of the challenges is that it's not always possible to appropriately accommodate each user in each location. So what I mean by looking more widely, we work with Transport for London and the two local authorities to make sure and design up appropriate, really safe alternative cycle routes. So in terms of when we started at the beginning, we worked with TfL to really set a set of objectives for the scheme, including ours in terms of making it safer, a better public realm. But one of the key objectives for TfL is bus journey times on this corridor. So to accommodate those, it meant it was less possible to design cycle routes here. So we've come up with alternative routes, in particular, a really safe route through the park and some safe routes through the neighbourhood streets as well. So it's part of an overall strategy to support and encourage safe cycling.
And we actually went through a very similar exercise as we were looking at alternatives early on. We had included a bike lane on Fifth Avenue, knowing that there are a number of cyclists who use Fifth Avenue today. What ended up happening as we were accommodating the bike lane and turns and drop off and pick up, and buses, is that we really actually started to lose one of the most important kind of physical characteristics of Fifth Avenue, which is the strength of the grid and its linearity. And so as we were putting a bike path kind of winding in and out, we had areas where we had to cut into the curb, where we had to make room for a left turn, for cars making left turns. And it actually became a very non-New York typology. And one of the great things about Fifth Avenue here is its linearity, and being able to maintain that and also accentuate it through the design, through an alley of trees that is consistent on each block. And we were also losing that as we started to kind of eat away at the sidewalk. In places, the sidewalk was actually becoming more narrow than it was today as we were accommodating the bike lane. So we took that opportunity to actually zoom out and really think about the ecosystem of streets in Midtown where we could accommodate bike lanes, understanding there is a lot of bike traffic that's coming out of Central Park. We actually identified 6th Avenue as an opportunity to do a bi-directional bike lane. So that's something that's being explored now. And then also just strengthening the east-west connections as well, so that 5th Avenue didn't need to be kind of the through street for bike lanes north-south. We're making east-west connections to get to the other north-south bike lanes.
I think it's interesting. In order to address Fifth Avenue, you have to be thinking about Sixth, so you have to be thinking about, the parallel streets, and I'm sure the same, for London. Do we have a question here in the audience? Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Lenny Schwendinger, a nighttime designer, and I'm just curious.
We've got a microphone coming to you.
Hi. Anyway, I counted 2 mentions of night. One was night on its own, and the other was nightlife. Cool. And 2 mentions of lighting. Great, we love that. However, all of the illustrations are on white backgrounds, and all of the case study images are daytime. I make this point simply to say that the pedestrianization, which we could also call walkability, which extends walking into the evening hours with better lighting, that is so important. And I just wondered how Fifth Avenue, I know, had a lighting line item, and probably Knightsbridge does as well. Wondered how that's actually going to be effectuated, and that sometimes that's not through street lighting. Sometimes that's through the private contribution to the public realm. I'm wondering what you think about that.
Thank you for that question, and I wish our presentation was a little bit longer so we could address lighting and nighttime environment more thoroughly. But one of the challenges that Fifth Avenue has 2 challenges today. Number one is that it has a very uneven lighting environment. We have blocks that are extremely dark, blocks that are overlit. To do so, many storefronts compensate by actually having extremely brightly lit storefronts, which again impact your experience. As you're moving from a dark zone to a light zone, it's very difficult to see through. As a result of that, Fifth Avenue also, most of the stores close early. They close at 6 p.m., 7 p.m. It does not have a nighttime environment. One that actually, if stores were able to be open later, it would greatly benefit New York City's economy. So part of the transformation of Fifth includes even lighting throughout the new design, the 20 blocks, that provides a 2-headed light pole that equally illuminates the roadway and the sidewalks so that the avenue itself feels like one environment. We're hoping through those efforts, we're able to stimulate some of the retail spaces to be activated for longer into the night. And also thinking about Fifth Avenue as a key destination during the holidays. The sun goes down at 4 p.m. Lighting is so critical for this particular corridor. It is a very integral part of the design to think about, again, how does that environment, that pedestrian welcomeness that we're trying to create here does extend into the nighttime hours.
Can I ask just a follow-up? Does that request for these sort of longer operating hours, does that come from retailers, or is that something you're hoping to achieve?
We've had a lot of discussion with retailers. So around the world, you'll see some of the luxury retailers who have a restaurant or a cafe in their store. They can open an outdoor cafe. We have no room on Fifth Avenue for any outdoor cafes currently. So the hope is, and the interest is to create outdoor cafes on Fifth Avenue through some of those luxury stores or semi-luxury stores, whatever you want to call them, that can promote people staying longer, again, experientially, and also keeping, the environment activated and open later.
I'll just add very quickly to that beyond kind of the retailers, New York City and recommendations that came out of the New York panel are actually very invested in making Midtown a more vibrant 24/7 district. a lot of this also has to do with kind of the pressure of commercial to residential conversion, knowing that we have a real affordability crisis and need to add additional density. And so all of this is in keeping with the city's policy of extending these areas to be really more of like a live work.
Anyone want to take that question on the other side, or you want to ask from online?
So, yeah, but briefly, I think our experience has been very, very similar. So on the design team for the Knightsbridge project, we have Michael Grubb's studio, excellent lighting designers, and we really wanted to look at lighting from two perspectives, because similarly, darkness in the UK starts from about 4 o'clock for a lot of the year, so you have to think about that. So those two perspectives are, Knightsbridge doesn't announce itself at the moment. It doesn't have spectacular gateways. So can we do that? Can we really use lighting in such a way that people feel they're arriving at somewhere that is quality, that is wonderful, that is spectacular? And the second one is obviously safety as well. So to make sure that we assessed all the streets, to identify where there may be issues, so through this design process we can contribute to resolving those issues. And I think something that's really improved in recent years is awareness of how different genders and people from different backgrounds experience the public realm in very, very different ways. So it's very important for us that, as well as having the lighting experts with us, we did walkabouts with different communities so we can see how Knightsbridge is experienced through people with different eyes.
An online question?
Yeah, so we've got another question here. So I'll throw this one to Lee first of all. So thinking about increasing restrictions on cars, what's your vision for the role of vehicles in New York and London's most famous streets over the next decade?
Well, I think they're always going to be there. I mean, and they're necessary, particularly for people that might be a wheelchair user or whatever. So we do definitely need to consider it. And I think, overly pedestrianized streets sometimes can be a little bit boring. It's just about managing it, which comes down to the data. I just can't imagine no cars on Fifth Avenue at all. So, or any of the other streets, because it could have a sanitizing effect. So my point of view on that is that we just need to limit, but also maintain the character of a road being a place of transport.
So we also can't imagine Fifth Avenue with no cars. When we started this project, though, congestion pricing was still very much alive and in our kind of calculus and projections of future volumes along Fifth Avenue. With that up in the air, we are thinking of other ways, but mostly it has to do with mode and behavioral change, I think. Increasingly fewer and fewer cars are going into the central business district because we are giving over more space to pedestrians, and that's been the overall kind of policy and trend. So, at this point, with or without congestion pricing, I don't think that there's a specific policy to limit or actually exclude any vehicles on Fifth Avenue, but there definitely is a kind of tidal shift change of how many people we anticipate in the future will be driving into the CBD with or without congestion pricing.
Can I just add one more thing? Sorry. Before, a lot of times it's late at night. The tube only runs 24 hours on Fridays and Saturdays here. You really want to get an Uber, and having a nighttime economy, back to the lighting story, means that you do need to get that car, and it's an important aspect of any place, any city.
Over here? Hi. Do we have a mic for you?
Thanks. Mark Strauss, former president of AIA New York. But I'd like to ask a question. At least from the renderings, everything seemed very linear and consistent. How and with the center bus lane, how are you dealing with drop-offs and bus stops in that kind of environment?
Great. So the way the new street configuration is envisioned doesn't change the way buses operate today. Buses do have a central bus lane that allows them to continue south directly. That usually carries express buses. And buses do pull over to the western lane to basically pick up and drop off passengers. That is still occurring on the new plan. That is what we call the curb lane. It allows buses to pull off to pick up and drop off passengers, but also allows vehicles to get over to that lane to make a right turn. So for all intents and purposes, from a transportation perspective, the avenue is working exactly the same as it does today for buses. We did try, as Alexis mentioned, when we were exploring the idea of introducing a bike lane, we did explore opportunities in which buses had lay-by lanes that would pull off from the roadway to pick up and drop off passengers. We also explored the idea of having pull-off lanes where vehicles would use to make left-turn lanes. And what resulted in that was actually stakeholders having a really negative reaction to a non-linear symmetric street. They felt it wasn't New York. It felt more like a park-like environment as opposed to the strength of Fifth Avenue that it's had for decades and decades through its history. And they actually wanted symmetry. And that was very interesting for us to find out. I think it's something that we don't, at least as designers, think about all the time. We see streets around the world having different geometries, meandering paths, different types of variety throughout. And that gut reaction that we received from everyone was critical for us to understand that that is what makes Fifth Avenue characteristic of New York City. And it was something that we wanted to reinforce with the design as opposed to take away from.
And in terms of the pickup drop-off, if you look at how Bergdorf Goodman and Saks Fifth Avenue handles their pickup drop-off, they have pushed everybody to the side streets. They don't want pickup drop-off in front of their stores. So DOT will make pickup drop-off on all the side streets where there isn't a bus stop or any other issue. And people will have to relearn that they need to stop on the side streets. It's a relearning that will happen during construction as people are relearning how to get anywhere at that time.
I know we just have a few more minutes. I'm curious about, do you want to take another question online, or we can go to our last series of questions for both?
Sure, I reckon we've probably got time for one more on each side, so I will do another one from here. How do improved urban realms impact the surrounding architecture, and are they opening up more to the street?
Thank you.
Certainly in London, there's incredible architecture everywhere, frankly. But oftentimes people don't see it and aren't able to appreciate it. So the Strand is a classic example of this, where you have the most protected, historically protected buildings that you can. Grade 1 listed architecture at Somerset House, St. Mary Le Strand, St. Clement Danes. And I think when the traffic was removed, for me certainly, and for I'm sure many others that have visited, it was a chance to really appreciate the quality of the individual buildings and the collective of the architecture in a way that you can't do when you're worried you're going to get hit by a bus or a taxi. It also means there's less pollution. So pollution is something visibly that you can see often on buildings. St. Mary Le Strand is another example where you can see 50, 60 years of built up pollution that's on that building, and ultimately it will get cleaned. It'll be this incredible jewel right in the heart of the Strand. So those are the visual. I think then the ability to have a much better physical connection to the frontages, where you've mentioned wider sidewalks, we've talked about wider footways. It means that there's more comfort level, that if you're coming and going from those frontages, opportunities to spill out. I know that that's something certainly that we really try to do. You talked about the cafe culture as well, that if you have those moments to create dwell time, it goes back to that dictum of William H. White, people attract people. It's a reality. It's a truth that if you can allow people to be in the space, it's going to inherently make the entire experience in the public realm much richer than it is.
I think similarly on Fifth Avenue, the enlargement of sidewalks, the idea of creating a much pleasant environment does drive people to recognize the incredible architecture that surrounds the street.
Fifth Avenue is lined by architectural landmarks that range from a wide period of ages. So it's a very important street from that perspective, but again, one that's not recognized by the passerby because it's so chaotic. You actually cannot pause to enjoy your environment. You're just moving through. That said, part of the design also recognizes that amongst the architectural landmarks, there are spaces that are, again, feel qualitatively different as you're moving through. This includes the area around the New York Public Library, where the building is set back and the grounds around the library and Bryant Park contribute to a different feeling on the street. Similarly, that happens around Rockefeller Center, where again, the building is set back, the opening to the Channel Gardens gives you a very different feel of the space and the streetscape than the rest of the corridors. So in those particular locations, we are creating what we're calling the piazzas, which are moments where the sidewalk has a little bit less amount of urban furniture. Trees are actually organized to echo some of the architectural landmarks as opposed to be an even line of street trees on the renderings that I mentioned. So we're very much able to highlight those unique moments, but we're also proposing to raise the roadway to be at the same level as the sidewalk and to pave it in concrete. So it also, as you're moving through the corridor, you recognize you're in a slightly different environment, one that makes you pause, makes you go slower as opposed to getting from point A and point B, and hopefully be able to, again, lift your gaze up and see the opening to the sky and some of these beautiful architectural landmarks. So beyond improving pedestrian circulation, beyond improving the overall sense of place of the street, our design also seeks to highlight these landmarks, which in many cases are not perceived because of the chaos in which, that one experiences as they're moving through.
I'm struck that we haven't, and this question about the architecture brings this up for me. We haven't talked about storefront signage, and the role that storefront signage plays in announcing, and giving you breadcrumbs as a pedestrian, blade signs or projecting signs that come off the buildings that are for pedestrians on the side of the street where they're shopping, as opposed to the signs that are flat against the wall that are for the people across the street rather than those on the sidewalk. Has that come up in any of these redesigns, or have retailers expressed an interest in their signage and improving their signage?
Well, Fifth Avenue has, it definitely struck the Fifth Avenue Association as something to address. But Fifth Avenue apparently has the strictest zoning for signage that the city has. It is very unclear. I mean, I'm hoping that at some point we can address LED signs, which are unclear about how they can be used in stores. I mean, if you're going to a luxury store, they don't do this. But if you go into a Microsoft or some other store, you'll see an LED sign right behind the glass storefront that projects out. It has supposed to be a certain amount of feet away from the glass, but I mean, these are all the kinds of things we want to be able to address, but they have to be addressed individually at some point, just like the store lighting has to be addressed individually once you can show them what they're going to get. But I'm not sure we're going to be able to change the zoning to create an even more strict signage. For instance, if you go to the holidays, Louis Vuitton will wrap their building and it'll be like completely gorgeous and exciting. And then you'll go to Uniqlo and, you'll have it wrapped in something not so exciting. It's a different interpretation of what can be done.
So with our last few minutes, perhaps we can pivot to lessons learned and start with London. So, how can we learn from one another, and what specific lessons can you share with our audience about, your process and achieving consensus and achieving sort of a best-in-class environment?
They're great questions, and I think for me it's taking time to work with stakeholders and never assume that any of your stakeholders fully support your project and your aspirations and your design. So keep going back, keep checking with them throughout every design stage, because things can change. So always respect the knowledge of stakeholders, which is absolutely critical, because whilst we're surrounded by experts, actually it's the local people who are using the streets all the time that understand it very, very well. So for me, I think that's a real key lesson. I think two other things are assemble the right team, a really good team. So on Knightsbridge, to return to that project, really good landscape designers, really good transport planners, and really good lighting designers. So having that team, and also ourselves actors who understand the wider place. So assemble the right team. And I would say a business improvement district, they really help in terms of assembling partners, which in this case they started when I was talking. Knightsbridge had been neglected because there just wasn't one body that was responsible for it. So the bid comes along, and very quickly, it's only existed for 2 years, so very quickly assembles all partners. And here we are at a stage where we have a project that is really motoring ahead.
It might be worth pointing out that the St. Mary's Le Strand pedestrianization was done by a bid as well. So, I mean, just to reinforce what you're saying, they really get things done.
To add to that, I would say definitely have a lot of on-ground observation, really understand how the area works, because what really is going to unlock these projects is the less glamorous side of servicing, maintenance, management, deliveries, pickups, those sorts of things that are difficult to show in a rendering, they're difficult to show in a diagram, but you need to demonstrate that they're being thought through and that they're being solved, reconciled, whatever it may be, because that is ultimately the sticking point. And if you can't crack that, you do all of this incredible investment, and then the actual system of the street begins again, and if you didn't get it right, you got it wrong. The other thing I wanted to say is a word of encouragement that I think there's collectively a global sharing of knowledge is building on this movement, and each of us are learning already from each other, and it means that we can, when we're trying to have these difficult conversations to say it is possible, we can point to each other and say, well, they've done it in London, they've done it in New York. When the Strand was going, the Times Square pedestrianization was a seminal case study. It showed immediately that it could be done, and had you not done that, I'm not sure that there was anything to point to say you can make something as complex as the urban environment of Times Square. You can change that fundamentally. Why can't we do it in London? And then hopefully people are looking at the Strand and saying, well, look at what they've done in the Strand. Look what they're doing in Paris, etc.
I love that cross-pollinization. Go ahead, Alexis.
Well, we're still very much in the midst of the Fifth Avenue project, so it's very nice to get to learn from our partners and their lessons learned. I think New York government has a long history of working very closely with our business improvement districts to a lot of success with operations and maintenance, cleanliness, security. The leap of faith that was taken on Fifth Avenue was to closely partner with the bids at the earliest stages of design. And that was unusual. I think it led to some tension at a lot of points, but definitely has resulted in a better project, because ultimately the operations and maintenance partners are there right in the beginning, selecting the materials, understanding every decision has some kind of consequence for operations and maintenance. And what it's done on kind of the government side is this, city-affiliated public-private partnership has really allowed us to spur innovation in ways that I think we could probably replicate in other public corridors.
Anything to add on that?
No, I mean, I think that working as a public-private partnership has been to a great benefit. As Alexis said, and that we're, very cognizant that non-standard features are going to be, responsibility of the bids. And as we're looking at costs for the construction, we're also looking at costs for the capital maintenance and the regular maintenance. And there'll be a lot of discussions with DOT about who's doing what. And those we're just dancing around right now because we need a better idea of the costs, the ramifications before we finalize any of that. But, we know that it has to be done.
The devil's in the details, right? Well, with that, I want to thank you all for joining us today. And I think in New York, we're going to stick around for a little bit and do some networking. And thank you in London.
Thanks so much, everybody.